Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 248. I'm delighted to welcome onto the podcast today, Orla White. Orla, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Ben. Thank you very much for having me on today.
No problem at all. I obviously invited you on after a top recommendation from David O'Connor, previous guest on the podcast. So big thank you to David for his recommendation. You're currently the health and performance coach at Shamrock Rovers Women. So we're going to dive into that role in a little bit and what that actually involves. But we always start in the same place, Ola. So just take us through your background to start with.
Yeah, of course. So, I'm very lucky to be in a great position at the moment in Rovers. It's a brand new role. So how I kind of got there, I suppose, was through. I'm still a relatively young coach. I'd like to think anyway. I'm 28. So I'm from a town called Naas in County Kildare, which is just up the road from Rovers. And when I left school, I didn't kind of really know what I wanted to do. I just knew I was quite active and I played football. I played Gaelic football. And when I left, I kind of wasn't fully sure that the academic route would have been for me. But I went to what was called a PLC college, which was kind of an in-between between big college and school, essentially. And I did some incredible learning there. I met some great people, and I studied leisure management and did a higher national diploma. But what was great about that was I did a lot of practical certs. So I did my instruction, my personal training, I did lifeguarding, and I just got to meet some great people and some great coaches. And from there, I had the opportunity to then go into DIT, which is now, I think, TUD. And I went on to study again leisure management. There was some great practical elements to that course as well, which for me was a huge benefit because I can't sit still too much in the classroom environments and the best learning environments for me. So from there, completed my studies. I went on to do an internship in the Osprey, which was just a commercial gym, kind of a hotel-based gym. And I got my first real experience of a commercial side of the industry and what it was kind of like day to day, with just taking classes, managing clients, doing kind of basic programming. And then from there, I finished out college. I got more into kind of one-to-one coaching with athletes, and I was continuing to play football just at a local level. But from my time in the commercial elements of the industry, I kind of knew I wanted to do more with athletes and with sport as well. So I got in contact with a really cool gym called Unit 3 Health and Fitness. We're based in Naas, and they were only open about 6 months at the time. And I just asked to go in and kind of do freelance personal training. So I went in eventually and I met the owners, and thankfully they allowed me to come in. And for a little while, we just did kind of our own thing. So I just did some freelance work. And then the more and more that we spoke, the more I kind of realized that our values were very similar. And we both kind of wanted the same things. And the environment was great for me. It was a great learning environment too. So eventually from there, I just became a coach there. And that was maybe 5 years ago now. And since then, I'm now one of the managers there. And very recently as well, I just became a director there too. So from the industry in that sense, that's kind of where I'm at with that now. In terms of football, then I continued playing at a local level. And when I got into Unit 3, I had a great opportunity then to start working one-to-one with athletes in an environment that was created for them, essentially. So it was a really cool gym that had everything that we needed there. And working with some great athletes, Claire Walsh, Claudia Keenan, mostly footballers, but some boxers, a race car driver, some swimmers, golf players. And from that position then, I decided that I wanted to help them from a physical aspect. But from my experience in football, what wasn't kind of being done, or what the players a lot of the time were struggling with, was trying to cope with the demands of the environment from a mental point of view as well. So I got really into that, and I decided that the best way for me to help the athletes and the footballers especially was actually to go and experience the environment myself then. So I just started training and started trialing with some women's national league clubs, or it's called the Women's Premier Division now in Ireland. And thankfully, I got into Athlone Town, which is one of the clubs here in the country, and I played there for a season. So it was actually the COVID year, so it felt like about 3 years that I was there. I think we did about 4 pre-seasons in that year, But yeah, it was excellent. It was a brilliant experience for me. It was a brilliant experience to get out of my comfort zone. And I most definitely wasn't the best player, but I was probably up there with one of the hardest workers. I got some starts, I got some minutes, and I really got to learn how to deal with the environment, like, and the tough times and the great times, when you're starting, when you're dropped, when you're winning, when you're losing. And that experience of that year has really helped me as a coach, and has really, really helped me put myself into the shoes of the athletes that I work with. So from that, then, very much knew that I didn't want to be a footballer after that year, and really just wanted to continue in the coaching realm. And I felt like that was where I could make the most difference. That's where I could help the most people. And yeah, so I just continued doing that. I worked primarily one-to-one with some players in small groups as well. And then I continued playing just at kind of a lower level, and decided that to hang up my boots and to try and take what I have been doing in a one-to-one environment and try to put that into a team culture and a team environment. And how I was going to do that was the challenge, really. So last season I worked with a team called DLR Waves, so that was a great first introduction into trying to build something. And it was an underage team as well. It was under 17, so it was trying to really build a culture within that group. And then from there, it was a great learning year. I met some great coaches, worked with some great players, and then from last year took some great learnings into this year as well, which is where I'm at with Shamrock Rovers. So yeah, with Rovers now, we started, I think everything kind of tried to start in December of last year. It's unique in a sense that we're brand new. So Shamrock Rovers, actually, this is the first year that they're having a women's team that are semi-professional. And the club did have a senior women's team a good few years ago, but it was under the amateur ranks. So we're really trying to establish a winning culture, and something that hasn't really been established in the country as of yet. The league itself has grown leaps and bounds every single year, and there's some incredible volunteers, there's some incredible players in the league, incredible coaches, and we really feel that as a club we can just add a little bit more to that now. We can really try and help the growth of the league and of our club in total. So my role essentially is great. It's unique in a sense that it's health and performance, and health is there first, because we really look at these players as people. And for me, essentially, I try to help these players just develop as humans. And I really believe that once we do that, the performance takes care of itself then. So the model essentially is built on looking after them, trying to educate them, trying to make them as self-sufficient as possible, and trying to get the togetherness of the group. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
Brilliant. So going into that role, when you meet the players for the first time, you literally got a blank slate to design a program from, and I'm sure you had 1,000,001 ideas of the things that you wanted to try and implement. But to scale that right back, what were the very first steps that you took with the players, whether that was on a communication level or any sort of organization in terms of their training? What were the initial steps that you took?
Yeah, well, when designing the program, the initial steps was just meeting the manager and seeing if it was going to work, basically, because I would have had my model, and I wanted to kind of see if it would match with theirs, really. So I met with the director of football, which is Jason Carey, and then I met with the manager, Collie O'Neill, and the staff that then came in. And from the first kind of meeting, essentially, we knew we were on the right page, or on the same page even, and we were on the right track. So with Collie, he has a model which is care, coach, and model. So it's caring about these players as people, it's coaching them to the best of our ability, and then it's modeling the behaviors that we're asking of them. So for me, that's kind of exactly what I was trying to do, essentially. And from that position on, it was just so many sit downs on the tiniest things to the biggest things. Obviously, we wanted to make sure that they were going to meet the physical demands of the game. So a huge amount of that was looking at that aspect of it. But I think collectively we knew we wanted this program, and we do want this program to be much more than just X's and O's and periodization. Like we want to develop something here that hasn't been done before. It's the first time the country has signed women players on semi-professional contracts and are actually looking after them in the best way that we can at the moment. So the first stages was definitely sitting down with the staff, manager especially, and just making sure that we were all on the same page with what we wanted to do. Second thing then was asking the players then. So there's no point in the staff laying down all the rules if the players aren't really up for it or agreeing with it as well. So we sat with the group and probably some of the senior players to start with. And again, it's brand new. So it was weird in the sense that we had players coming from probably 6 different established cultures from 6 different teams within the league. So it was a challenge to try and get everyone on the same page. And I think at the beginning we did do a lot on that, and do refer back to it weekly. And we do really try to build what we're trying to build as Shamrock Rovers. And it has taken a bit of time, and it's going to continue to take a little bit of time. But those are definitely the initial stages, sitting down, communicating with the staff, and then asking the players to give their opinion in, and then what we created in our philosophy and our principles, and we've stuck with them since the beginning. We do definitely link back into them, but I think the biggest thing in making sure that these things are followed is consistency. So it's like everyone calls each other out basically. So we have our principles, and if someone's not adhering to them, we call them out, and whether that's a staff member or a player. We have a fine system as well. I don't know how well that's going now, but I think girls are a little bit lenient with each other. But we do have a fine system that we created at the start of the year for staff and for players. And I think for the girls as well, it was probably the first time they had to do that. There was definitely some hiccups at the start, forgetting gear and the usual stuff. But yeah, so that's kind of was our first stages.
Brilliant. I've actually just read a really good book on what you're saying there about creating a culture, about being able to call people out in a kind of a non-threatening way at the same time, where people don't get their backs up, and it's called Radical Candor. So if you've not read it, or if people haven't read it, go and read it, because it is just about that. It's about creating culture around that, where you can be honest and open. So no, that's really good, really, really cool. In terms of that feedback that you got from players then, what was the main things that they sort of pointed out from you, that they wanted from you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we have a lot of personalities in the team, which is excellent. And I think this is the first time that professional football for women has really been introduced in the country. So what our idea of professionalism was over here, what their idea of professionalism was over there. Maybe the younger players was down there, the club might have been over there. So that's kind of really been the challenge. And I think it would have just been maybe tiny things like maybe the timings of our trainings. And a lot of the time they're very good because they ask you questions and they keep you on your toes. Like, so say if we're doing gym, then straight into pitch afterwards, they'll be like, well, why are we doing a heavy gym session if we're going out on the pitch? And I have to answer them. So they're great at keeping you on your toes, and everything that we do, we've really tried to communicate true to them. And they're very, very good. Like, so some of the things they would have asked was just tiny things at the beginning, because even the likes of gear, where we were training, what times we were training, how we were communicating, the fine system. But I think there wasn't too many differences of opinion really. Like, I think we all kind of knew that what we were trying to establish was something that was new. It was something that hasn't been done before, and we were all trying to kind of believe in this higher purpose of just upping the standards of professionalism in the league. The league has been incredible. It's really grown from volunteers. It's grown immensely from the volunteers that have been within the league over the last couple of years, and we're just one part of that journey, and we all really believe in that. So in terms of kind of backlash or disputes, there wasn't a huge amount of it, which was unusual essentially for a brand new culture. But the senior players have been great, the younger players are brilliant at following in, and we just are very lucky with a really, really good group.
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept, isn't it? Because when you've got younger players coming through, especially we're recording this like days away from the World Cup kicking off. You've got young players that are watching the women's game now on this level, where you've got tens of thousands of fans, and obviously the amount of preparation that's going into the game now. That's probably the norm for them, isn't it? So that's what they're now comparing to. And then you've got your older players who know a completely different setup from before. So it's a really interesting concept, and really interesting, I guess, to hear the different perspectives from different experience levels of players as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting because we have a good few senior players, but two of the two that have been around the block, shall we say, are Anya O'Gorman and Stephanie Zambra, and formerly Stephanie Roach. So those two have literally gone through when they had nothing essentially, and they were trying to work and have a career in football. And they went on strike as the Irish with the Irish girls a couple of years ago, and have really, really made an impact on the progression of the the league and of the players and of our country as well. And then we have younger players now who, when we play our home games, we've broken records of attendance in the league. And there's girls that are asking, there's young kids that are asking for their jerseys and sign my boots and do this. And it's so different to having 3 people at a game 10 years ago. So yeah, it's very different. But I think the senior players definitely keep the younger players in with their feet on the ground anyway. And there's great respect there among the group, and it's a great responsibility for them as well, because they have these young kids that are looking up to them, and their actions matter, and it has an impact. So it's very positive.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of, you've obviously spoke about the health side of your role, like the holistic side, that support that you're giving to your players. And what was the approach? Because I know a lot of people looking from the outside of football and professional sport as a whole, and they think that every athlete across the world has got it absolutely nailed in terms of the nutrition, in terms of the sleep. Anyone that's worked in any sort of sport probably knows very, very different. So what would you say, obviously, without individualizing this and picking out individuals, was the general approach that players were taking to that side before you started? So sleep, nutrition, general recovery, what was it like for them?
Beforehand, so I would have known a good few players before we came in, but I wouldn't have worked with them on a one-to-one level. And going back to my original dilemma was how to get the work that I was doing with athletes on a one-to-one level. How was I going to form that into the culture and the environment, and try and, instead of having a chat with someone on a one-to-one level, I now had to do it in a group of 20 odd players, and how we were going to do that was going to be quite tough. Like, so one thing that we did that was really positive at the start of the year was we just layered everything. So in week 1, we were like, okay, what's most important this week? And it was this. So we just did that. And then in the second week, we added another layer. And then in the third week, we added another layer. And one of those layers was talking to them and educating them on other aspects of performance. So there was one of the weeks early in pre-season when we went into the classroom in our training facility, and I just spoke to them for about an hour on all other aspects of performance. So some of that would have been sleep, some of that would have been nutrition, other aspects of recovery. A lot of it was mindset work as well. And their knowledge for some of them would have been excellent, for some of them would have been terrible. So in a group setting, it's brilliant because it was quite an open discussion. In terms of sleep, it was trying to, and I suppose one challenge as well is that although we're semi-professional, these girls are still in college, they still have other jobs, and they aren't fully committed to football and can go to bed at 9 o'clock every night. And so it's, and some, like Anya has a child as well, and there's other things going on in their lives too. So it's trying to do the best with what they have wherever they can. Like, so essentially for us, a huge part of that was education and just trying to give them the tools that they needed to do in order to be as self-sufficient as possible. So with sleep, it was just trying to give them advice on how to have the best sleep routine, and educating them on serotonin and melatonin. And even for girls that are traveling as well, we had 3 players that traveled over to the USA to play a double header over there a couple of months ago in preparation for the World Cup. And the 3 of them are traveling back on the Thursday, and on the Saturday we had an away game in Galway. So we had to essentially control and manage their exposure to light and their exposure to caffeine, and try and get them back on Irish time in a very short period of time. So a lot of that education work would have come from the original chat, and then as we go on throughout the season, it's the girls that are traveling or girls that are away, we just look at it from an individual perspective. But yeah, a huge part of it is education, communication, and just allowing them the space to talk to me on a personal level as well.
I love that layered approach, because that's essentially habit stacking, isn't it? For anyone that's read any James Clear sort of stuff, that's stacking habits on top of each other, which is really, really powerful. Is there anything else you give? Because I think that as an issue or a challenge will be the challenge of a lot of coaches, especially working in a team sport, that how do I take my individual approach and put it across a squad of 20, 30 players? Is there anything else that you've used? Because I absolutely love that you give as a bit of a tip to coaches or a bit of advice.
I think one thing for me, and I don't know if it's a tip essentially, because I've just been very lucky in a sense that the manager is incredible. Collie O'Neill is just amazing, and he's a data guy, like, and he loves data. He works in that externally as well, and he really likes what we're trying to do with that approach as well. So he gives me great freedom, and because I communicate back to just do whatever I want basically, once it's controlled. So we're in the process this year of just data collecting, and that's it. Like, we're in our first year. We started in January. We did testing in January. We've retested throughout the break now. We're on a 2-week break. We've gotten them into the gym and done some weekly testing as well, whether it's vertical jumps or sit and reach, just to make sure that we're maintaining as well. But we're also collecting data for maybe a holistical approach as well. So before every training session, the girls will fill in a form, and that will be, how's your energy today? Did you sleep well? Is there anything going on? Is there anything we can help you with? And we track their menstrual cycle then as well. So that's something that's been very helpful to me. And I think from a female coach's perspective, I'm actually quite in a unique position. There isn't a huge amount of female performance coaches or strength and conditioning coaches that are within this industry, and I think it's been a great help to the girls that are there, that I understand the menstrual cycle, and it's been great for the guys, the manager and the assistant manager as well, to just see from that perspective to what's going on with them as well. So I think the habit stacking that you call it is something that's a great tip. But then just trying to communicate as much as you can. Microdosing is something as well that has been great for us too, in terms of physical preparation. So we only have X amount of time with them every week. So we try to microdose as much as we can. And that was a great tip given to me from Owen Donnelly. That's the men's S&C coach in Rovers as well, to just microdose as much as you can. So a huge amount of that would have been on prehabs. Like, we have 5 minutes, everyone do Nordics and Copenhagen's and get this done. And we try to microdose things just as quick as we can throughout the week of contact time that we have.
Yeah, brilliant. Just on the menstrual cycle, menstrual health, we did the episode not that long ago, probably is a few weeks ago now, with I can't really mention the Australians, can I? Because you're clashing in this first game. It's like bringing up the rivals. But Georgia Brown and Jack Sharkey came on, and that's obviously what we spoke about, is the menstrual cycle, menstrual health, and the link to performance. When you spoke to the girls about that, and you spoke about the impact on performance and how to go about that and how to track, were they aware of the impact that it could have, or was it something new to them? Like, what was the level of understanding around that?
Yeah, I think for some players, some are very aware, and we're very aware of the benefit to monitoring it, and to managing it. But then again, probably some of the younger players didn't realize the impact it was going to have as well. I think one thing that stood out to me is kind of the uneducation around contraceptive pills as well, and how they can kind of mask certain symptoms too. So previously I would have seen a lot of younger girls bordering on female triad syndrome, from maybe being on the pill and not having regular periods as well, where they are in a position where they're under fueling and overexerting energy. So their periods have essentially disappeared, but they're unaware of that, because they're on a contraceptive pill. So that can have huge impacts on hormonal health going forward. It can have huge impacts on their energy, huge impacts on injuries as well. So that was one thing that I became quite aware of when I was working one-to-one with coaches, and I continue to see it now as well. And it's something that one of our physios is great, Aoife, and we have a doctor on board too, Emma, who have been brilliant on the education side there. So I think for us, it's just been about try to educate the players, make sure they're all tracking. I'm following it as well, so if there's irregularities, I kind of see it. And then it's something that's seen as quite a negative within women's sports, but it's such a great data collector in terms of the energy that the players have. And if there's anything kind of off, it can really give you a huge amount of data on a player. So it's been quite helpful for us, and we've just really looked at educating, and tracking for them is a huge part of that.
I suppose when we're talking about individualizing as well, there's probably nothing bigger that is needed to be tracked than that in the women's game either, is there? Because that is literally an individual data point that is going to be probably different and affect people differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even from a day-to-day level, previously when I was younger and I had coaches that were screaming at me when I was probably not playing well, or I might have been in agony with stomach cramps, or I might have had really low energy on the day, but you didn't really want to say it to your male coach, who maybe mightn't have been as open to it. Whereas now, Collie and Kieran, who are our manager and assistant manager, are excellent. They fully understand now, and they have great acceptance for it and great education around it. And there's no, like, say in a training session, it might just be a quick text that I've gone, the forms say this, they're experiencing this today. It's not giving them a get out of jail free card, but it's just so they're aware if they're a little bit off the pace, or they're a little bit struggling with their stomach, or the guys are just aware of it. So I think that's been great from a day-to-day point of view, and the girls feel much more comfortable speaking about it now as well.
I think that's a really important point. Obviously, it definitely crosses over to menstrual health and performance in the women's game, but even in the men's game as well, when we're talking about injuries or just the holistic side as a whole, that honesty was probably a few years ago, it was probably flagged up as, oh, they might be struggling with a little injury. They'll just hide it because it's seen as a negative to be have training adapted or whatever it's going to be. Whereas now, there seems like there's more environments being created, like you guys are doing over there, where you're encouraging that honesty and it's not being seen as a negative from the players. Is that fair to say?
100%, yeah. And I think that's been a team approach as well. And Collie as well is excellent. So I've seen managers that are, maybe you're kind of scared to say if you have a little bit of a niggle, but Collie's absolutely excellent. He really encourages the girls to be very, very blunt and very honest. And he puts their health first and the performance second. So I think the girls feel that. I think collectively as a group we feel that, and we see and I think once you know that your staff have your back, it's much easier to communicate openly and freely then. So yeah, it's been great, and it's really helped our team as well.
Brilliant. And just another aspect to that, the nutrition side, which we had the last episode with Amy O'Keefe from Man United. We can do whole episodes on nutrition, I'm sure. Yeah. But it'll just be interesting from your perspective. Obviously, you've got a part-time squad of players, a semi-professional squad of players that are working, and like you said, children and all the other things that come into play with it. How do you go about that with the players? There's obviously the education side that you've touched on, but on a day-to-day basis, a week-to-week basis, what does that look like in terms of that support for those players?
Yeah, so again, from an education point of view there, we spoke about that in pre-season, and it's something that we continue to chat about with the players on a one-to-one basis, probably more so than anything else. At the start of the season, we did some in-body scans, and that gave every player a goal basically of hitting their calories every day. So what I have seen a lot of the time is, especially with female athletes for some reason, is that they tend to underfuel a lot of the time, and it could just be from society, it could just be from not wanting to be maybe a bit bigger, a bit stronger, building muscle mass. But especially with the younger players, there's been a huge issue around actually fueling correctly for the game. So that's one of the questions on the forms that the girls have to fill in every day. Have you fueled correctly for training? Have you hit your calories? Have you fueled correctly with proper foods? And it's just checking in with them, and they all think I'm mad because we'd go for an away game and I was taking orange juice off their table the other day, and they were like, she's mad. But it's something that's, it's so important, and the timing of certain things on game days is important as well. And for 90% of the time, their nutrition should be health based, but on game days and when we actually want them to perform, they can have as much sugar as they want, and I'd feed them jellies as they're running up and down the pitch if I could. But timing is more important there, and trying to manipulate their sugars and everything else. So I think it's just been a learning experience for them all. I think it's something that in general they've thinking, or they have thought that they've had to eat less in order to be faster, and there's been some really weird myths that I wasn't aware of until maybe this season or last season. And it's really been about knocking them down and trying to empower the players that you need to fuel your body correctly. And in order to do that, the first way to do that is just hit your calories, and then again layer it. So once you've hit your calories, then what are the macronutrients? Are you hitting your macronutrients? And then from there, okay, are you looking at performing and how we look at performance, and even tiny little tips like beetroot and dark chocolate and hydration and electrolytes. And there's tiny details, but it is the tiny details that we're trying to layer into the program that we're creating this year. So players are great. We can also control their food on the day as well of the game, obviously too. So we control that and make sure that their timing is right. We have some snacks in the dressing room beforehand, with some gels for half time and stuff, and then we feed them after the games too. So it's something that we control as best as we can, and what they do in their own time is what they do in their own time, but we can just control the environment we create, the education that we give, and we trust that they're doing the best that they can.
Yeah, I love that split as well, splitting into the health for the majority of the time, and then around game day performance can be a little bit different, but coming with that education as well. I love that approach. No, that's really cool. I wanted to discuss as well the future of the program, because you've been, when did your role start? Did you say December? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, so the staff would have been in December, and then we got the players in just in January.
Okay, so we're now recording this in July, so we're not too far into the program. 7 months, well, 6 months really, into the program. But I wanted to talk about the future, because I'm sure you probably see it in different levels where you want to take it, you want to add things all the time, constantly make things better. What do you feel like is the next stage? So you've set all this in place, which sounds great. Sounds like there's a really good culture being developed. What's like the next step for you and from the coaches, I suppose, as well?
Yeah, I think we've been very, very lucky so far, and we've had a lot of learning in the last 6 months. Although it's felt like about 6 years because it's gone so quick and so slow at the same time. And we've really, it's mad when you start because you're really just creating the foundations instead of just walking into a pre-existing culture or establishments. But I think in short, it's really about, when you look at culture, the first rule of war is controlling your environment. So for us, it's about getting the right people on the bus and getting the wrong people off the bus. So who you have who are really believing in the higher purpose of what we're trying to create, they're the people who need to be there. And the people who maybe aren't and are maybe kind of have one foot out the door, they just need to be removed. So and that could be from staff, could be from players, it could be from anyone that's just directly or indirectly involved. And ultimately, we've spoken about the culture and the environment is the number one, and there's no staff member or no player that will kind of outweigh that essentially. So really the next stage is just protecting what we have built and really trying to uphold everyone's standards that we have created. I think we have a great environment where the players don't feel like it's a dictatorship at all. I think it's very free flowing. The senior players communicate quite a lot. The younger players speak to the senior players, so everything does come true. I'm in a unique position as well, where I probably spend the most time with the players on a one-to-one basis. So a lot of it comes through me as well. The physio as well can get a lot of feedback too. So the next stage for us is really just believing in what we're doing, trusting the process, and getting the right people in the right positions in order to elevate us to the next level.
It's a really good point. That it's something we spoke about ages ago on the podcast, that a lot of the time, anyone that's in a role like a performance coach, S&C coach, sports scientist, not only do you spend a lot of time with the players, you also normally you'll probably spend the first time with the players throughout the day as well, wouldn't you, in terms of warm-ups or generally just greeting them. So if the culture doesn't run through that member of staff, that's the initial impact that they're having on the players, which is a really important thing, isn't it? Because you've got to start off on the right foot.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a great role because you can have such an impact, and it's an unusual one because you are a staff member, but you are also kind of there in the middle of them all the time. So they do feed a lot of information through me as well, and maybe because I'm a female too, they might feel a bit more comfortable. I'm probably closer to age in some of them as well. But the two guys are great. All staff members are very, very approachable, and the environment that we have created, I think the togetherness and the trust is a huge part of that. Everyone that's kind of on the bus is there for a reason, and we're really looking at the higher purpose of what we're trying to achieve. And the day-to-day culture that you mentioned there is so important, and how we greet the players, how they greet each other is something that's definitely been there. And whether it's a handshake or a hello or eye contact, it's something that has just starts the day and it finishes the day, and it's something that's so small, but when you look at those tiny details, it's really those details that matter when you're trying to build something.
I think that's what you notice as well, because we've been fortunate enough to go into a number of different clubs, and you see it at a lot of places, like those little things that you're talking about there, like handshakes, eye contact, all that sort of stuff. You feel it and you see it. Whereas some other places you go into is the opposite. And I think that's really important, isn't it? For not just the players and staff in terms of their relationship, but external people coming in, staff to staff. I think that's all really important in terms of adding to that culture.
Massively, yeah. And I think it does offer, like, we control the controllables, and that's one part of our philosophy. And we really look at just looking at ourselves, and of course we look at opposition when we're from a tactical point of view, but we really are just looking at focusing on what we want to do and the mark that we want to have within the league and within the country. So when we focus on that, there does become a different feel for the culture and the environment that you are trying to create. And I think the team is very much together. And I feel when we go to, say, away games, teams feel that. And I think when teams do come to Tallaght Stadium and they play us at home, they do feel that. There is that, I don't know whether you'd call it an intimidation factor or something, that it kind of gives a different vibe off where, oh God, this team are together and they're here to perform as one. So yeah, I think tiny actions create really big influences sometimes. And I think that is happening now, thankfully.
Yeah, you see that when you start to look at different organisations as well, don't you? Outside of football, even outside of sport, that those little things that people feel like they're little things are not when you add them all together. So no, it's really important. Oh, that's brilliant. Some really good insight there. I want to move on to some of the quick fire questions that we finish the podcast with each time. And the first one being, who've been some of the biggest influences on your career so far?
Wow, yeah. So I'm again quite young, but I've had some great people around me and continue to have some great people around me. I think my family are obviously one. My parents are great. My partner Jess and my brother Evan, my dad as well. My dad's someone who really gets me and has always really encouraged me to fulfill my potential, and he supports me daily. But I think from a professional point of view, and my colleague, one of my best friends, Niall Barrett, has been someone that's really empowered me to kind of see my potential, and he's probably my biggest supporter. And in my opinion, he's the best coach in the world. He's a boxing coach. He's one of the owners in Unit 3, and he coaches Gary Cully and a couple of the guys that are there. So he's had a massive influence on my learning, on my development, both professionally and personally as well. And he's someone that I'd always pick up the phone to, whether it's something that's positive or whether it's something that I need his help with. He's been exceptional, and I think 90% of all my knowledge has come from him, which I don't think I've ever told him before. But yeah, he's incredible, and I wouldn't be I definitely wouldn't be the coach that I am without him, and I wouldn't be the person I am today without him. So he's someone that has a big influence on me daily.
Brilliant. What would you say your biggest strength is as a practitioner?
Well, my biggest strength, so I think my biggest strength is probably humility. I think that I'm someone that's always been in learning environments, and that's really allowed me to learn from anyone. So I think it's a great skill when you can kind of put your ego to the side and learn from literally anyone who's around you, and whether that's a superior, whether that's someone who's an intern, whether that's someone who's a colleague, whether that's a player, whether it's a senior player, whether it's someone that just walks in the door, whether it's your opposition. I think that I've always strived in those environments where I've really just learned from chatting to people and not being afraid to ask people questions. And I think having humility as a strength is something that can really help you go far and really help you develop in quite a short space of time. And I think in some environments and maybe some cultures within football as well, humility is maybe seen as a weakness. But for me, it's something that can give you such great strengths, and it can really help elevate you to new levels.
Yeah, great point. If you were able to speak to a younger Orla, I know you mentioned that you're not the oldest coach in the world, so very early on in your coaching career, but if you went back a few years, especially when you mentioned before about playing and getting to the end of that point of playing and knowing that you wanted to focus your time more on coaching, what would you be giving as a top tip in terms of career advice?
I think for me, there's been so many learnings. Like every day I learn something new, and sometimes it's true positive experiences, sometimes it's true failures. And I'm always quite reflective. I'd like to think on things that have gone well and things that have gone not so well. But I think maybe from a younger element, obviously when you're young, you're trying to get into the industry, and I'm so passionate about this purpose that I'm doing, and I just love helping people, that I probably blurred some boundaries sometimes between my professional life and my personal life, and kind of leaving my phone down when I was going home. And I was probably too giving at some points. And yes, I want to be one of the best coaches in the world, but I also want to get married and have children and have a successful family life too. So that's been such a great learning for me, even reading books. And some of the best coaches in the world have been the best coaches in the world, but maybe not so great in their personal lives, and have maybe had failed marriages or not great relationships with their kids, or have maybe just done things in their personal life that hasn't been so great. So it's something that I've always really wanted to do both, and I think that it's achievable to do that, to be a good person and to be a good wife. And to be a good hopefully mom someday, but also be one of the best coaches in the world. So for me, a great learning there was having the boundary line between when I go home and I'm here with Jess, I'm here with Jess. And when I'm with my family, I'm spending time with them. And when I'm in work, I'm very much there, and I'm very much there for the players, and they know they can reach out to me, and I'll always reach back to them and help them out. But yeah, that would definitely be something I'd probably have more awareness of from a younger age. That would be some advice I'd give.
Just on that point, I feel like, because when you set the boundaries early on with that, because I think it's really hard, isn't it? Work-life balance is something people talk about a lot. But when you set the boundaries, I think sometimes people don't mean to cross the boundary. It's just that you've probably not set it. Like for a lot of coaches, like when players are messaging, they might message at a certain time of day, they expect a response because they're messaging you. Whereas if they know, oh, she'll get back to me on like tomorrow, or she'll get back to me after this time, or whatever the boundaries are that you set, I feel like that's the important thing, isn't it? To set that, to let players know. And sometimes I don't think people they're not going out with the aim to cross that boundary. It's just that they want that information at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we encourage players to be selfish, and we encourage them to do what they can for what they need. And for me, that's definitely the learning. You've really hit the nail on the head there, is setting them up, like, and communicating your boundary lines. And I think for me, I'm probably quite a giving person, and I want the athletes to have the best of the best. And if they need information, I want to give it to them. So, and that's fulfilling for me. But if I'm on my phone half the night when I'm supposed to be at home with my family, it's not going to have a good impact on my family life. So for me, it was definitely that. I think setting the boundary lines now is something that I do regularly. It probably wasn't when I was a little bit younger, because I was just trying to give instead of looking at recharging or just spending some downtime in other very important aspects of my life as well. So yeah, that's definitely the nail on the head.
Brilliant point. And I think that's possibly one of the first times someone's brought that up on that question as well. So I think it's a really important point as well. Ola, in terms of CPD, continued development as a coach, where do you focus your time?
Yeah, so for me, I think just trying to establish how you learn and what kind of learner you are is something that's quite important as well. And for me, when I was in school, I didn't really I hated school. I hated the classroom environment, and it wasn't something where I learned quite easily. I kind of just preferred being up and doing, and I've always learned very authentically through chatting to people. And I really love getting to know people and getting to know their stories. And I can stay silent for 10 minutes while someone speaks. Is probably a skill that I've developed over time. But for me, chatting with people, getting into learning environments, not being afraid to reach out to coaches as well. Like even Dave that you mentioned at the start of the year, I just reached out to him a couple of years ago and said, here, do you want to go for a coffee and have a chat? And learned from him. And John Sullivan as well would be one that I'd reached out to too. And just not being afraid to ask people to meet up for a coffee, and people are so accommodating and will really help you too. And I read a lot of books and a lot of coaching books. Phil Jackson, Coach Wooden, there's Bill Walsh has been a lot that I've read previously as well, that have really helped in the day to day. I think courses are great, seminars are great, that are kind of just weekly or a day course. And I recently did a course with Brad Scales, who's a Max Verstappen's performance coach, so in Formula One. So I work with a race car driver, James Rowe, as a performance coach, and he's in the States now with Indy Next, and he's competing over there. So in order to help him, I just did that course too, and it looked at some other aspects of performance as well. And it's funny because even though they're different sports, there's so much I learned from that that's helping Shamrock Rovers too. And one small thing would be neck training for minimization of concussions. So say in Rovers, I think we're probably the first women's team in the country that are doing neck prehab in order to minimize the risk of concussions for the players as well. So I think that a lot of the time you can learn in environments that are completely external to your sport, and make them applicable to your sport as well. So again, I can learn, it's a skill that I'm very grateful for, that I can learn from any environment and from anyone that's there. So having that sponge mentality, that the girls always laugh about as well, instead of, I'm always like, don't be a rock, be a sponge. And trying to encourage everyone to be more like that, to just absorb as much information as they can. So for me, it's about just talking to people. I learn the most from that. Little seminars, webinars, and I prefer that approach to learning rather than an academic point of view.
Amazing. I'm going to ask a selfish question now, just off the back of that. What would be, if you got a couple of books up there, recommendations that you've read recently that stand up above the rest, what would you say the top recommendations of books were?
I love Coach John Wooden. He's excellent. I can't remember the name of his book. I read it quite a while ago, but his was excellent. And I think my philosophy is probably similar to his in terms of he put his family first as well. And he really wanted to be a good person before a good coach. And he had some incredible wins in basketball. And he's passed now, but his book was really, really good too. Read a book recently as well, Monica Aldama, I think her name is, or Alabama. She was a cheerleading coach, or is a cheerleading coach. The Netflix documentary Cheer, people might know that. Yeah, she was the head coach for one of the colleges there, Navarro College. So I read her book recently as well. And that's been really interesting. But my books are great. I try to not give them out because I take so many notes in them. And a lot of the time it's like, that's brilliant, I'd do that. And then some of the books as well, I'd never do that as a coach. So they're brilliant reference points. And again, speaking about Niall, we talk about books all the time, and some coaches are the best coaches in the world, but probably not the best people. So we're trying to crack the code on that one, and how to be both.
I think that's a great message. Oh, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much for coming on. Big thank you to David as well for your recommendation, because you definitely stood up to everything that he was talking about when we were chatting about getting you on the podcast. So no, I really appreciate you giving up your time. If people have got questions or they want more book recommendations, they want to chat about anything, where would you direct them?
Yeah, so I'd say the best way is probably just my Instagram or my social media account. So it's just Orla White Coaching. My gym as well that we have in Nace is Unit 3 Health and Fitness. So if you check out there, we have some incredible coaches that are working with us there. We have some incredible athletes, and it's a great community there too. So either of them would be great. I'm on LinkedIn as well, but I'm not as active as I'd like to be. I should get into that more, but it's just Orla White on LinkedIn too.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate your time, Ola, and keep up the amazing work.
Thank you so much, Ben. It's a privilege to be chatting with you today. Thank you.